The goal today is for you to be able to handle millions of items on demand using Node.js streams. Not only read data, but also process it individually. I'll be using the Node.js 19, and you should also be using the same versions as me, so you won't have any environmental problems there. You're gonna set up a test environment using Jest and reaches 100% code coverage, and also add integration tests to make sure our powerful project works as expected. This class is very exciting for me. We will finally handle buffers by hand, which I've never seen tutorials on the internet. We'll need it because we'll inspect individual chunks and determine when a CSV file starts and ends, so we can grab properties and parse them to JSON, avoiding compromising performance by doing it. You use JavaScript generators to process and free up the process so you can avoid blocking the Node.js process. And the last thing, you use pass-through string in practice to report progress of all our processing tasks. I'll discuss with you some problems you might face in production when building this kind of tool. And you might be wondering what is an ND.JSON file. An ND.JSON file is a format used to stream JSON data. A JSON file would contain an array of JSON objects. Thinking about streaming data where we read and process it on demand, to make the final output JSON array, we would have to change the file by adding brackets at the beginning and at the end of the file, and adding commas in each line, making files even heavier. That's where ND.JSON comes in handy. Instead of having brackets and commas, each line is represented by a single JSON object, and lines are separated by breaking line separators. Are you excited about this project? I am excited about it. Then let's begin. All right, first of all, let's create our folder project, right? So I'm gonna call it project CSV to ND.JSON part 01, okay? Just to say that this is the first part, and then we're gonna keep doing in the next class. So let's create a Node.js project first. All right, and then let's keep always using type module. So we're gonna work with ECMAScript modules always. I'm gonna create two folders here. First, our source code, and then the tasks, all right? Perfect. Let's install Jest also. So in 2090.2. Actually, this should be installed as developer, right? Developer dependencies. Perfect. All right, what else? Well, let's grab from the first module the Jest config that we had there. So I'm gonna paste it here. So we are using 100% code coverage. We're gonna keep it. We have just two reporters, and that's it. Well, let's grab from package.json the actual test and start, and let's paste it so we can save time. All right, and then I'm gonna create here the test watch as well. So watch all. Let's save it. All right, I'm gonna try working with you using TDD, all right? So to work with test-driven development, we should create first our structure, and then we start testing them all, okay? So to create our structure, let's go to our server, and right now we're gonna create our first Node.js stream component. We're gonna do our CSV parser to parse to ND.JSON. I'm gonna create a new folder here, and I'm gonna call it string components, okay? Okay, after it, I'm gonna create the first file, which will be CSV to ND.JSON.js. And I'm gonna create only the data structure for now, and then we can start creating our tests and planning whatever we want here, okay? Perfect. So let's first of all create our CSV to ND.JSON class. Oops. Okay. And as you saw in the last class, every time we want to intercept a readable file, we want to process it, we're gonna use a transform string, okay? So let's import, and we can extend it from Node.js. So I'm gonna grab the transform, and I'm gonna extend it. Okay? When we are extended it, we should call the constructor first, okay? And then we're gonna implement some functions there. So we could implement the read, the transform, and the write, okay? So we're gonna need only two. We're gonna need the final, which is, let's just grab the callback here and call this callback, okay? So when it finishes processing, okay, the last chunk, usually when we have push with null, right, on the readable side. Okay, after it, we can implement the transform, which will get the encoding and the callback. I'm gonna just call the callback for now with the chunk because I'm just creating the structure, all right? After it, we're gonna start implement it. I just need the structure so we can start writing our tests and making our assertions, okay? Nice, so let's export it. So export default class. And all right, so I'm thinking that we should do more here, just about our data structure. When we are working with CSV files, which is a file who has commas there and breaking lines, so we should receive some data here, right? The delimiter, which usually is the comma, and headers, so we can name it when we are trying to parse to JSON. So I'm gonna say like ID, name, and etc. Okay, but for headers, I think this should be some required object. Okay, nice. I'm gonna create two properties here, which would be the delimiter and headers, private objects right now. Okay, and then I'm gonna just say that my delimiter is gonna receive this delimiter, and my headers, it's gonna receive headers. Just make sure you understood here. When you use this hashbang character, we are saying these properties are only available during this class, okay? It's private. Okay. Nice. I think we are all set. Let's start implementing tasks, okay? So I'm gonna keep the same structure, components, and I'm gonna create the first file here. It's gonna be csv to ndjson.test.js. Okay. Oops. We can close other configurations here, and that's all for now. All right. So we are using Jest. Jest, we could import all of the data there from just globals, and I'm gonna grab expect, describe, and age, as we've done on the first project in this course, okay? As I already told you, you could use them as global variables, but I don't like using global variables. I want to know where they came from, okay? So this is why I always use the modules directly. Perfect. Let's import our CSV to JSON file there. Just remember, we should put JS at the end. And I'm gonna start creating our first suite task. So CSV to ndJSON task suite. And then we could start writing our to-do list, okay? So let's think about what kind of tasks we should need for this kind of project. First of all, we should receive a CSV file, right? Or CSV string and parse it to JSON, basically, okay? So given a CSV string, it should return a ndJSON string, okay? Why not files here? Because files are just strings, okay? File, we're gonna use Node.js to grab it from the operating system, and then we can parse it. Perfect. What else? Well, when we are trying to create CSV files, let's just have a grasp of what could be. Imagine a CSV file like this. Name, 01, Eric, okay? Not always we're gonna have a break line here, okay? But sometimes we're gonna have it. I'm thinking with you, when you are trying to parse the CSV to JSON, the first thing we should know is we should grab the headers and then grab the values, okay? We know that the delimiter here is comma, okay? But to grab each separate line, we know that we have a break line here, okay? So what if this file doesn't have the final break line? So we're gonna have some trouble. So I'm just gonna map it as an exception so we can write tests and make sure this kind of problem is gonna be fixed on our code, okay? So it should work with strings, actually, strings that doesn't contains break lines at the end, okay? Nice. Well, what else? Well, imagine if we had some kind of problem like this, like a space between them. I think we should gonna receive this kind of file because it's actually a valid file, okay? It's just, we should just ignore this kind of break lines. So I'm gonna write more one tests for it. So it should work with files that has break lines in the beginning of the string. Let's move here so you can see better. Okay, nice. I'm gonna start running our tests so we make sure everything is working as expected. Let's see. Well, coverage, we didn't reach our coverage because we don't have any tests, but our to-do list is ready to use. Make sure you have the same idea from here and make sure you are using the same Node.js version as me, okay? Nice. So test watch. Perfect. So as we do in TDD, let's start implementing the first tests. Okay. To implement this test, we should first instantiate our end.json file, right? So let's start it. CSV to JSON equals new CSV to JSON. We should pass the delimiter. So the delimiter is comma in this case. In headers, well, first of all, let's create some string here. Const CSV string. It's gonna be ID, name, address, just mocking some data here so we can start working on it. Name Eric, ID 01, and address, I don't know, 01 also, okay? And I'm gonna do this one with a break line because the last test is gonna try without it, okay? Nice. Headers, what headers we have here? Well, we have ID, name, and address, right? So we're gonna have this data there. So let's make sure it's all strings. That's it for now, okay? So what do we expect when we send this CSV string? So const expected. I expect to have ID with 01, okay? As a string for now. And what else? Name, exactly the same name I have there, Eric, and address equals address 01. Exactly the same string we have here, okay? Nice, very nice. All right. Well, I'm gonna keep it as a JSON, not a JSON string file, because I wanna make sure when I parse this data, it's a valid JSON also, okay? Perfect. All right, let's get from jest so we can monitor how many calls we had on our readable channel on our duplex stream here, on our transform, okay? So I'm gonna write jest fn, okay? And then I will say my CSV to JSON. Every time I have a data, I'm gonna call this function, okay? So we can monitor how many times this chunk was called on our readable channel, okay? And then I'm gonna activate the writable channel from this transform string. So now I'm gonna write the string, so with our CSV string, okay? Nice. Well, every time we are reading after we finish, behind the scenes, it is being calling the dot end function. So the dot end, we make sure that our final will be called, okay? Or dot end. Perfect. The dot end belongs to the writable. Yeah, that's it. Just signals that there's no more items to be written. Nice. Well, what else? Well, right now we should try seeing how many times our function was called and make sure that they have the same amount of calls that we had, and actually we have this data right there. All right. So as I know, in this specific case, we have just one item. We should get only the first call here. So I'm gonna get the mock calls, the last call, okay? Because I know that it's just one and it returns an array, okay? So, oops. With the last call, I want to grab the first argument, okay? The first argument here will be our current. So I'm gonna expect that my current result to be strict equal our expected. Okay, nice. However, I expect this to be a string, right? Because it's a CSV string and a JSON string. Well, yeah, I think this is better. So we can make the string file just to make sure everything is as we're expecting here. So I'm gonna break this line, format, and that's it for now. So we're gonna try working on this one first. So we're gonna send a CSV file, a string data there. We're gonna test it. We're gonna wait for data, and then I want this to be called with a message that has exactly this same JSON object. But as we are parsing CSV string to a ND JSON string, this is why I'm stringifying the expected result, okay? Nice. So I'm gonna save it. The test right now is not passing because we are just receiving a buffer here because we haven't implemented this function yet. Perfect. All right, the first thing I would think when I'm working with CSV JSON is that we should split it by lines, right? We have breaking lines here, so we should break those lines and actually try and find our delimiter here, okay? So every time I have a break line, I know that's a line, and then I should push this data to whoever is listening to this function. So whenever I have this, I will trigger their own data and we will have the actual function. However, I should ignore the header file, okay? The header file shouldn't go with an empty line because this doesn't mean anything. We should actually got it as a JSON. Perfect, perfect. Let's go there and let's try implement it. So I'm gonna first implement a private function here called update buffer, okay? So what we're gonna do here, we're gonna work on demand as we should do on streams. So this will be a generator function so we can yield results as we have, okay? If you've never seen this before, don't worry, let's do it together. All right, so I'm gonna accumulate everything on a buffer. So I'm gonna allocate a buffer with 0 here, okay? What I'm trying to do here, imagine that we have this line, okay? And we grab like some piece of data that doesn't have any break lines here. So we're gonna wait for the next iteration and then see if we have the remaining data with the break line. If it has the break line, so we're gonna grab only the data which is between that break line, and then we're gonna send data and keep the buffer in memory. And then when we consume the remaining bytes, we can start pushing later, okay? So let's see this in practice. I think this is gonna be easier to understand. So when we update a buffer, I'm gonna receive a chunk here, okay? And I'm gonna just return it back so you can understand what I'm doing here. On our transform function, I'm gonna iterate, so I'm gonna call it item of this update buffer, okay? And I'm gonna just redirect our chunk. Nice. So instead of calling my callback here, I'm gonna redirect this data to the readable channel, okay? To the readable channel, I'm gonna say it this dot push item. That's it, okay? So I'm gonna try reading data, and whenever I have data, I'm gonna start producing data to the item. Nice, 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 nice. If I save it, you're gonna see that nothing has changed there. So one test failing because it's still a buffer. Perfect. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna try first doing that idea to concat data on our buffer, okay? So our buffer, it's gonna be, this buffer, the private one, it's gonna be buffer.concat. So I'm gonna grab the buffer I have already, and I'm gonna use chunk, okay? So if you don't understand, it will ensure if we got a chunk that is not completed and doesn't have a break line, will concat with the previous red chunk, okay? So imagine the first time we got maybe 0, 1 and some comma there. Well, this is not completed, right? We cannot try parsing this to a JSON. So we're gonna ask for the second time, and then we get the remaining ones, which would be like Eric and address, okay? So then we have the break line there, and then we can try parsing and returning data, okay? So I'm gonna work on this logic right now. Okay, so I will try finding this break line, okay? So I'm gonna call the break line index 0, and I'm gonna make some like 2 constants here. So break line symbol will be the usually break line that we have on Linux and Mac. I think if you are on Windows, we use /r, but try running this on WSL and Linux objects, okay? I'm gonna call it index not found as -1, because when we are trying to find some string or something on JavaScript, it usually returns -1, okay? So I'm gonna write, and I'm gonna try running this loop until we don't have anything founded there, okay? So the first time we're gonna run it, we're gonna try finding this, and we're gonna update this break line index on each iteration, okay? So our break line index is gonna receive our buffer, okay? And we're gonna try finding the break line there, okay? Break line symbol as a buffer, because we are interacting through buffers, as you've seen a lot. I'm not working with strings this time. Okay, so the first time I'm gonna try looking for this character there. So I know that is a line that I can process, okay? However, if this line wasn't founded, so it returns -1, I know that I should break and wait for the next iteration. We're gonna wait for the second time to process it, okay? Nice. Well, if I found it, the break line, I know that I can process it. So I'm gonna split the remaining bytes that got from this chunk, and I'm gonna just ignore it this time. So then const next buffer index, it's gonna be our break line index plus break line symbol dot length, okay? This is how many bytes I'm gonna get this time to process that line. So this line actually will be our buffer dot sub array, which is likely a slice. Okay, so I'm gonna grab from 0 to the next buffer array index. I actually gonna call maybe the line data index. Okay, so this would be clear for you. So this whole thing is actually the line, the complete line that we want to process, all right, until only this break line. Okay, now I have this break line. I could say that my line data is line.toString. Okay, and then we can actually console this line to see if we got the right thing. Okay, I'm gonna save it and let's see. So I got a lot of things here, but it's like infinite loop, right? We should know when we had to stop consume this buffer. So I actually broke everything here. I'm gonna kill this terminal just for now. All right, so whenever I found this, I should consume this buffer and remove it so we can keep processing the whole buffer, okay? If I'm not consuming the buffer, if I'm not changing it, it's gonna be always on our main buffer here. So we're gonna replace our buffer with itself, but I'm gonna remove the data we have already processed, okay? So line data index. I would say maybe line to process index. I think it's gonna be easier to understand, okay? So I'm gonna cut it out all the value. So I will remove from the main buffer the data we already processed, okay? Nice. But what if this line data is just an empty line? So if this is just an empty line, it's equal our break line symbol, I will just say, oh, continue, go to the next iteration, okay? Don't try parsing it because it's just empty line. So if it's an empty line, ignore this line. This is gonna be helpful for the second test we just made. All right, so maybe I think this buffer is gonna be updated right now. So let's try running our test again. Test watch. Ooh, something. Oh yeah, I'm not in the right folder. It's 7 part 1 npm run test watch. All right, so we are not in the infinite loop anymore. However, we could see 2 iterations, right? Because we have 2 break lines there. So we have one for headers and the second for the value itself. Nice. Now we should just work on the lines. So I'm gonna keep them all in a ndJSON line. It's gonna be an array, okay? And then I'm gonna get all the headers we have. I'm gonna grab a copy of it, so we can, whenever we get a line, I'm just gonna remove from this array, okay? All right, so now it's easier. So we're gonna process the item itself. So I'm gonna use our line data and I'm gonna split it by our delimiter, okay? So our delimiter, it's comma, right? We have a symbol there. So now we have the whole line in this time, and now I'm breaking these lines by the comma character. All right, so first of all, I'm gonna grab the first key. So the CSV file should be ordered by headers. So I'm gonna use header shift. So I'm gonna grab the first item in the headers we just got and remove it from the array, okay? And the value will be the item itself. So I'm gonna grab this console and put here so we can see key and value. Okay, let's save it and let's see what we have on our logs. So here, key ID value 1, key name value name Eric, key address and value address. Ooh, nice. But see, sometimes we can see a break line here, but let's just make sure we remove it. So replace break line symbol by nothing, okay? So this should make us not seeing any break lines on values. Perfect. We are almost there. However, we should ignore the first iteration when we have ID equals our ID, right? This is the header. So we should ignore. So if the key is exactly the same thing or value, we should break it, okay? We should ignore this line. And then now we should see only the ID and values we want, okay? Nice. Well, what else? Now we could do our end.json line to push our string. So I'm gonna write here our key, our key and our value, okay? Just make sure you write it properly because we're gonna insert the commas here and transform it into JSON later, okay? Nice. Well, see, I'm still on the loop here. So whenever we find our line, we should actually call the transform to call our readable channel with the data, okay? So we're gonna move this yield to our while true. So whenever I find the data, I'm gonna push this data later. Nice. So if the end.json line is empty, so if it's 0 here, I'm gonna say, okay, just ignore because this line is empty for some reason. We're gonna try not sending data. Otherwise, we're gonna use the yield to say that we found our string, okay? So I'm gonna say the end.json data is gonna be in our line, okay? And I'm gonna join by our delimiter, which is be our comma there. So I'm gonna have the whole array separated by it, and then I am gonna do a buffer from, okay? And I'm gonna start with the line we usually start on a JSON file. I'm gonna concat it with our end.json data, okay? And then I should end it with our line separator there, okay? Our JSON with this key. And then we should just make sure we add a break line after it. So I'm gonna just put our break line symbol there. All right, let's see if it works. I just save it. And we grab our data here. Well, it seemed not work because it's a buffer, right? However, if we change the type of it, object mode in Node.js streams, we could see it as a string. So it's saying our chunk is a string, not a buffer in this case. Well, let's keep it as a buffer so we can save memory. And on our test, we could actually not try doing it by string, but instead by a buffer, okay? Buffer.from and the result. So I'm just saved. Well, it's saying, okay, let's try doing by string also because I don't know if in memory it's gonna be different. So the current dot to, actually, let's do a JSON parse. So if the JSON is invalid, we know that it's not a valid JSON anyway. So I parsed it and our test is passing. Ooh, very nice. Ooh, check it out if your test is passing. If you wanna make sure this is working fine, we could say our data there and just see ID 1, name Eric, address as we want. Ooh, exciting, isn't it? Well, let's make sure our test cases here are passing. So I'm just removing this one and I will just omit this test and go to the second one, okay? On the second one, we actually could copy paste the whole thing, because it's gonna be the same thing, right? We're gonna just change our input and see how the output is gonna be. All right, so on our second test, if I remove it, it should be the same result, right? So I just saved, and ooh, the test is not passing, and the final is not terrible. This means that it never called our function, okay? So what should we do now? Well, on our function here, we could see a problem. We are trying to find the break lines here. However, if we don't have the break line on the end, it's never gonna call the last chunk. So we can force it by calling our final here, okay? So on our final, we're gonna try seeing if it needs actually to parse it. So our buffer object, if it's empty, I'm just gonna call our callback, okay? Because there's nothing to process. Otherwise, I'm gonna call our update buffer, okay? And I will call our break line there with our object. So what's gonna happen here? As I'm adding a break line here, it's just gonna be adding the break line at the end of the buffer because we are just concatenating it, okay? So now we could grab the remaining bytes. So we should do exactly the same thing we did here. So I'm just gonna copy and paste it. Close the parenthesis here. And then I'm gonna do exactly the same push item there, okay? Otherwise, it's gonna be closing the whole thing. I just saved, and let's see. Well, the test is passing, my friend, and we are almost reaching 100% code coverage. Amazing, isn't it? Well, what else? Well, it's just missing the last test, right? So let's try implementing it. Same idea. Let's copy it and paste it. I should do something more harder now. I will try creating more items. So to Anna my street. Okay. So now I actually expect 2 calls, right? So expect in the first call to have this data, okay? In the second call, I expect the remaining bytes, which would be 02 without N, Anna, and my street, okay? Perfect. Now I could call. I actually want to get some calls from here. So I'm gonna get calls, okay? The first call, I'll call first call. And the second one, I'm gonna call second, okay? So the first call should have what we have in the first call, the expected. So here, expected the first one. In the second, it's gonna be the second one, okay? Nice. I will save it and let's see how this will be handled by our tests. It is still passing, but we should add some like breaking lines here, right? Empty files. Oh no, here is just break lines on the beginner. So I'm gonna put some break lines here and let's see how our tests handle. So it seems it's working fine because on our implementation here, we actually handle it, right? So we have here, so it's all set, it's passing whenever we have empty files. So if I add more empty files at the end, it shouldn't break our code, right? Nice. Perfect. Well, this was the last test, all right? Empty files are working fine. And now we should actually write our functions to test if everything's working fine, okay? So in the next class, we're gonna write our reporter function and put this to work with gigabytes of files with CSV files parsing it, all right? As I said, in the next class, we are going to continue this project by adding a progress reporter string component using the Node.js pass-through class. And finally, check out if our project is working with big files. I hope this class has exceeded your expectations. I'm Eric Wendell, and I'll see you in the next video.